Good afternoon everybody and welcome back to another episode of Rift Amps. Okay, so we've just finished off this Ainsley Lister signature combo in black, the one I was showing you last week. We've just finished putting it in the cabinet. It's looking good. Speakers on, speaker cables in, reverb cables connected, all hooked up. Just got to get a final little polish and clean up, and then the customer is welcome to have it. So that's the first one, serial number 28. 29's on the shelf. Cabinet is incoming for that one. He's having that in green, and then that one can go out to the customer too. So really happy with this one. Sounds great. Ainsley signed it off, as you saw. So we've got a certificate for it, which is going to go in the nice folder along with all the instructions and things like that. So yeah, thumbs up for that one. I don't know if I've shown this one to you yet, but this is the cabinet for the PR18 that I was building over the last couple of weeks. He's having a cab in British Racing green with basket weave cloth, and he's having gold, brushed gold faceplates on it, so it's going to look really smart, quite trick. We don't build our own cabinets, we have them made just for us, and when they arrive they're pretty much ready to go. All we've got to do is drill and mark the chassis mounting holes and fit the handle. So that's my job today. Then I can get the reverb tank in, I can get the speaker loaded, speaker cable made up, so the cabinet will be all ready to go when the chassis is finished. Faceplates on the chassis, get it all loaded up, customer can have it. And I might show you how I do that, because drilling cabinets, drilling the mounting holes for the chassis can be quite difficult. Right, so the first job is to get some masking tape. I use this 2-inch wide tape. One strip along the back edge, one roughly across the middle for the handle, and then I have two running front to back, and it's lined up with the Tolex seam because that also marks the edge here on both sides. So we get those on there. Right, I'm going to tell you now, there is no set measurements for these because every cabinet will be ever so slightly different. For a number of reasons, but the main one we found is the thickness of the Tolex itself does change. It's never consistent. From one roll to the next, you might get one that's slightly thicker or thinner by as much as a 1/16 of an inch. So there is no absolute, this is where you need to drill your marking holes. So if you've bought yourself a kit, I recommend you do this job before you start on your chassis build. Now obviously we do hundreds of these, so we just have a spare chassis, our template chassis, that I put my measurements on. So I've marked up with certain things, and this is what we use to do our drilling, and then we know everything else will line up. First job then is we need to know how far forward or back we need to mount. We want the chassis to be. So we put it into the cabinet and we offer it up. Now, as you know, when it's tightened up, it's going to be up against the ceiling, not sitting like that. So you need to hold it in that place. Now, we also have to allow for the thickness of the faceplate that goes on. So you don't run it right up to the edge so you can't see the grill cloth anymore, because then that would overhang. We want to back it off until it's roughly consistent. Don't worry about left to right, we're just worrying about forward to back. We want it to be roughly consistent, and when that's there, I can now hold that in place at the rear. Sorry, I'm being defeated by a tripod. Hopefully you can see. And then I can take my square, and and I can roughly measure from the back of the chassis to the back of the, let's set you up so you can see. That's better. So with that roughly in place, take my set square, offer it up, bring that in, and just check it along, make sure it's consistent. And if it's not, I can adjust it. Now I know that these will be roughly, if I've got it exactly where I want it, which I haven't, it's moved forward, about there. Hold that in place. Comes out usually around an inch to 7/8 of an inch. So what I can do now is on the top, from this back edge, I can put a reference line, a datum. I think we'll go with 7/8 and draw that on. Right, so I've just spun the cabinet upside down so you can see. I've got a slight lip there, which is good, and we can see we're roughly square on the back. And if I want to come in and measure it, almost an inch. So it's about an inch, isn't it, on this cabinet, give or take. I'm just going to set my square to an inch from the end, minus a little bit, and that's what we'll go with. And all I do is I just get that on there, make my mark, come along, do another, make my mark, come along, do another, like so, all the way along. We'll grab the long ruler and we'll just join those up. So now that's my datum along the back. Next job is to do one for the handle. Now on these cabinets, as you can see, you've got a slightly slanted front relative to the back, and then we've got this extra slant here for to line up with the control panel. Now you don't, when you're lining up your handle on these, it's not halfway between this point and this point, nor is it halfway between this point and this point. We're actually halfway between the back and the point here. Reason for that is weight distribution. So when you lift the amp up, it feels like it's balanced. That should be roughly 8.5, 8 5/8. It's about 8.5, isn't it? So I'm going to do 4 1/4 from the back and have a datum line here. There you go. So I've got my 2 datum lines now. One for the chassis, one for the handle. Now I've got to find the centre point from this side and this side. Now these cabinets, when the wood is cut, this top panel, and by extension the bottom panel, is 20 inches on these. This is an American style cabinet, so it's built in Imperial. So it's 20 inches, but then you add on the thickness, well, the Tolex gets stuck on, so now we've got the thickness of the Tolex as well. Do you remember I said it would vary? So how do we find that? Well, the easiest way I know is to measure exactly 10 inches from this side in and 10 inches from this side in, and then I'll have 2 lines that are quite close to each other, and then I'll be able to find the centre of that. Set my square to 10 inches, and I have to allow for the thickness of the pencil as well. And so if I line that up along that line, I'll put a mark there, and then I can just come along and I'll show you why you just couldn't do 10 inches in, is because you can see that doesn't exactly line up. There's a 1/16 of an inch or so gap. Tell a lie, actually. That one lines up perfectly. Sometimes we find there's a bit of a gap, but this one must be ever so slightly smaller, or he's allowed for the thickness of it. Cool, that's lucky. Let's double check it. Yep. Yep. So I'll just do one for here as well. So there's my two datum. There's my two center points. Okay. So first job is the chassis. So now I'm going to offer up the chassis on top. I've already got two marks on here. See, I used the same technique on the chassis. I measured in from each side, and that's what I ended up with. And so the center of those two lines is my center point, so I can line that up. And I'm looking at this line as well, and I want to get the chassis equal each side. I want to get that square. It's about there. And check that I'm roughly the same to my line all the way along. Now what I could, because I laid the tape on the seam that runs along here, which comes to my edge, it should be equal all the way along now, if I get it right. And that seems to be equal from front to back. And the same on this side. So I'm fairly confident that now my chassis is sitting square in the cabinet, and it's not too far forward, too far back, left or right, nor is it twisted, which is a common thing. Final thing I like to do is I like to get my big square. You see my table's level, and then I can offer it up, and once I get that level, you can see how much gap I've got at each point, which is my clearance for the faceplate plus some wiggle room. I'm happy with that. So with that where I want it, I can just mark the holes with a pencil. And get those drilled. Right, handle's the other one. We've actually made up some templates for our handles. We've got two, which is the big leather style big handle as we call it, and we've got the smaller strap handle. So I've got my center point there, which I'll line up with that point there. Line these holes up on the lines, and that will give me the perfect drilling point for that handle. So then once I've marked those, I can get the drill out and drill 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Don't need to drill that middle one, that's just for lining it up. And that's how you do it. Take some practice. You've got to make sure that you measure everything. Measure twice, cut once, as they say. And that'll ensure that your chassis will sit square. And now what I'll also do is I'll slightly oversize these holes relative to the size of the bolt, and that will give me enough play in any direction to get it perfectly square when I do the final install. Oh, so customers just dropped this off. This is a Bognor Alchemist 2x12. Looks like a 4x12 with its square design, but no, come around the back, it's definitely a 2x12. It's got a G12M green back and a G12H 70th anniversary. Absolutely massive transformers on it. He's just brought it in for, he's fitted himself a new set of valves, wants me to bias it up for him. Fine, easy to do that. FX Loop is missing the level control. He said the knob and the shaft came out, so we've got to sort that out. And his foot switch XLR is missing a screw. You think it's the thing's cracked, so we're going to try and fix that for him if we can do it in time. But we are closing for Easter weekend, so we close the Friday and the Monday, and I want this gone and out the door by then, so we're just going to do what we need to do. Overall, it's in pretty nice shape. Funky chicken head knobs on it. Look at those. It's got some onboard effects and things. Delay, reverb, 3 different styles: plate, horn, and spring, and it's got tape, ducking, and analog for the delay. It's got a 40 watt mode and 20 watt mode, and you need to check the bias in both of those. He says the clean channel on this is really, really good, but he doesn't like the sound of the overdrive channel, so he uses it as a pedal platform. So yeah, there you go, Bognor Alchemist. So it weighs an absolute ton. I don't know why people do 2x12 combos anymore, especially of this wattage. But we're going to pull the chassis, have a look inside, and then get the thing biased up. Right, Bognor Alchemist on the bench. Right, so if we look at our board up here, which is our FX Loop and foot switch board, pot's actually missing. So someone's been in here before and removed that. The XLR is indeed cracked. So we're going to have to pull this board. Thankfully, it's just two plugs. Take those off and we'll be able to pull the board out. What else can I see? Well, biasing is done by adjusting these 2 potentiometers, one for each side. We'll have to look at the service manual to find out where the test point is, but nothing overly complicated. The rest of the amp looks fine. Nothing that I can see at the moment that concerns me. So, and he has told me that he did power it on, and it did seem to work. So, quite a bit of tarnishing on the sockets back here, but is what it is. Right, let's get this board out. Right, hopefully you can all see, but we've got the board out, and most of the pads for this pot are damaged, and there's some gunk on it. So I think the best thing to do is just to panel mount a normal pot and then run some flying leads to where the thing should go. But it looks like it's just the front. There's 6 holes there. I think the back 3 were just for mounting, and the front 3 where our signals are, but there's some oil or grease on it or something, so I'm just going to clean it off and then we can have another look. So isopropyl alcohol and Q-tips. We'll just give that a clean. Okay, so it looks like pin, we'll call this pin 1. Pin 1 goes via a capacitor to FX return. Pin 2 loops around and goes to H5 connector. And pin 3 can't tell where that goes actually. If I scrape these back, we should be able to buzz it out and see exactly what's going on. One moment, please. I'm just scraping back some of the mask so I can get a good connection on it. Okay. Continuity mode on your tester. So we'll just check that this pin here, we'll call it pin 1, goes to this pin on this connector. It also comes around to that capacitor. Good, right. There are no other traces on this side of the board. Okay. So that was that pin. This pin goes to pin 2 on this board. Sorry, on the H5 connector. Because this one looks like it goes here and there and there. And finally, this pin. This is the one we couldn't figure out. Where does this go? I think that's ground. Oh, you can see it's a square pad, so that'll be ground. So the easiest way to fix this is what? Because these pads here are unusable, and I haven't got a pad repair kit. So let's see if we've got the right pot. Well, let's find a schematic first. That's a good start. Right, found it. FX Loop, send and return. Here's the return. It goes via an inductor. And here's the pot. A100K. Pin 1 goes to that inductor. Pin 2 is out. Pin 3 is ground. Right, easy as that. Okay, so if I've got a PCB pot in stock, I'm going to try and install it and do some trace repairs. I think that's the best way. If not, I'll just have to run some flying leads to where it goes. Okay, Bognor back on the bench. As you can see, I have got an FX Loop knob, pot, potentiometer. That's what I'm trying to say. It is a bit of a bodge because the traces were absolutely ruined. So I've tried to price up a new board from Line 6 Bognor. They haven't come back to me yet, but the customer did say to me, just do what you need to do. Get the thing going again. So managed to put a pot in and do some jumpers and things to get it working. Checked it with a meter. Continuity's all good, so I'm happy with that. Anyway, we fired it up on the bench and I'm just measuring the bias. Now, it does have a bias test point which can be seen down here. It's where this this connector is. And I'm assuming at the factory they plug in something into that and then they can take the measurements from that. You adjust these two potentiometers to set the bias. Now, it doesn't have 1 ohm cathode current sensing resistors. It has 10 ohms, which means the measurements you have to divide by 10 to get your cathode current. So it says here at the test point on both sides you need to adjust pots. So bias output is 350 millivolts. Ohm's law tells us that will convert to 35 milliamps each side. So that's what I've done, is I've adjusted both of those for 350 millivolts at the test point each side, and I've measured our anode to cathode voltage at 427 volts on, they call it V1, and on V2 426 on the other. So Joule's law tells us 427 times 0.035 is 14.945 watts. And on the other side, 426 times 0.035 is 14.91 watts. 6L6s, 30 watts max, puts us at 49.7%. 14.945 divided by 30 puts us at 49.816. Now, you know our rule, as long as it ends up somewhere between 50 to 70%, then we're good. That's pretty much 50%, happy with that. All I need to do now is run a signal through it, look at the sine wave, see how that looks. But so far, I'm quite happy with it. Just going to check the operation of the loop, make sure everything's working as it should. I'm going to run it for a couple of hours, then I'm going to recheck the bias, make sure that hasn't moved or drifted. If it has, I'll put it back, but clearly they want it at 50%. So there you go, Bognor on the bench. Okay, so the Bognor's fixed, all back in its cabinet. Customer's on his way to collect it, but just had another customer drop off this silver plate 70s Fender Twin Reverb. Now, those eagle-eyed of you have noticed that it's got an extra knob on the end, which is the master volume, which was added to this model in 1972. So this must be a 72 to 83 3 model. In 1980, they went back to a black plate control panel, so it's got to be 72 to 79. It's actually, for a silver plate amp, in really nice condition. You rarely see them looking this good, as I've shown you with other amps. So come around the back. Voltage selector. It's the 100-watt model, not the later 135, so that puts us closer towards the early 70s. Chassis number is A606017, which puts it around 1974-ish. It's got the original Blue Label speakers in. And someone has kept a printout of the schematic in the back. Very handy. So what's it in for? Well, he said he's booked a recording studio for a couple of weeks' time. He was just checking and prepping everything. Turned it on, heard some cracks and popples, and noticed that the 3 of the output valves were glowing bright red. So he quickly turned it off, called me up and said, can I take a look at it? So, and of course I said, no problem, bring it in and we'll have a look. So first thing to do is to get the chassis out. I've already had a plug-in and a quick listen. They didn't red plate, but there certainly were some pops and hums. So we're going to pull the chassis, have a look inside, see if we can work out what is going on. Okay, chassis out the cabinet. Pretty clean inside, to be honest. Doesn't look like it's had much work done before, which is a good thing. I need to work out what's going on, but I can't see anything visually wrong with what's going on inside. Loss of the original caps, which might be due for replacement. I mean, if 3 valves are red plating, 3 tubes, then we need to look at why. Check the bias supply out. I'll just spin it over and show you the transformers, but I think this is a 1976. 1976. All the transformers date mid to early late. You know what I mean, 1976. So I think that's where this amp sits. So yeah, that's that. Can't see anything burnt inside, but we've got to go through, got to take some measurements. Well, that was easy. It's fixed. So I'll show you what the problem was. The amp's on at the moment, so I can't stick my fingers in it without a chopstick. Right, so I was just taking measurements around the output valves. We have pretty much 3 volts of negative bias voltage on the grids on one side, and about 2.5 volts on the other. Should be up somewhere around 50 volts. So definitely an issue with the bias supply. If we look at the schematic coming off the winding, the bias, the red and blue wire is our bias supply, goes through a 1k resistor, and through our diode, and it's saying we should have a negative 63 volts there. So there's the resistor, there's the diode. Measuring at this point, we had around negative 33 volts, so it's going somewhere. Passes then through this resistor to the bias balance pot, and we had about 3 volts here. First thing I did was swap out the capacitor that's here. That tested leaky at just 25 volts, and it's a 75 volt cap. So I've put a new one in. That increased the bias voltage by around 10-15 volts. Sorry, increased the negative voltage by, or decreased it, I suppose. It went more negative, right? But we still had only around 15 volts, negative 15 volts at this point. So swap out that cap there. Again, it tested leaky, and that's brought our bias voltage back up to where we want. And then it's just a case of balancing out the bias voltage each side. The amp has come alive. It sounds great. It's all sorted. So it's simply 2 old capacitors in the bias supply. Now, it's probably around this time that this amp should be looking at getting all the electrolytics done. So I'm going to recommend that to the customer. But I think as the amp's running fine, it's not excessively hummy or hissy. Yes, those filter caps are going to need doing soon, but it's going to at least get him through his recording session. So that'll be fine. I'm going to soak test it for a couple of hours and make sure there's no other issues. But really simple repair, guys. Nothing especially taxing for a, was it Tuesday afternoon? So happy with that. All done. Happy with them. Valves, I tested the valves because they did red plate. They're fine. Nothing else to worry about. So we'll get it back in the cabinet. Job done. Well, that's it then, guys. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful Easter. Workshop's going to be closed until Tuesday, whatever date that is. Just a quick one. I've just started on the custom PR35 build. This one is the one with no reverb on trem. It's just a treble middle bass. So you've got 2 missing valves. It looks really odd. So I just started work on that one. All the repairs are done. Apart from the Pro Reverb that I'm still tweaking, the silver plate one. Got that going. But that's it. Enjoy yourselves. See you soon.